All right, so we can sit here and go through the basics of mosquitoes. And what I really like to illustrate here is, we know that mosquitoes live in water. We know that the immature stages are in the water. And we can know that and we can picture that, but to actually see how that works and to see how these things move and where they are. The cool thing about mosquitoes is that they have the only pupal stage that's active. Like when you think of most pupa, they just sit there and, metamorphosize into the next stage. But we have pupa here that can move. And I really, it sounds kind of strange, but I really like mosquito larvae. They're called wrigglers, and you can see why they're called wrigglers of just the way that they move in that water. And so we have to remember that water stage when we're dealing with mosquitoes. And, everybody's concerned about the bite, but we have to do them in both places there. Now, there's lots of great resources out there for identifying mosquitoes, particularly identifying mosquitoes that are in your particular area. However, these are probably three of the most common ones. And I'm not going to go through, how many eyes they have and how many eggs they lay or anything. But just a couple quick points on these. We have the marsh mosquito, and this one is great because this one is the one that carries malaria. So we definitely like this one. That's a lot of fun. And if you think malaria is, over in Africa and Asia and all those places, well, we had 9 endemic cases in the United States last year. That means they didn't travel and pick it up somewhere else. They got it in the US, and that was in Florida and Texas. So malaria is coming back. And the marsh mosquitoes, hint, hint, lay their eggs in the raft. Okay, they create this little raft of eggs. So that's going to be the marsh mosquito there. Then what we have here is the house mosquito. And again, hint, hint, this one as an adult, you kind of see how it's like standing up almost, like it kind of just puts its back legs up and kind of pivots there. That's very indicative of this mosquito. If you see this bite position where that female kind of stands up, that's going to be your house mosquito. And house mosquitoes are great because they're carrying West Nile, they're feeding on birds, so they're also carrying Rift Valley fever. And this is the mosquito too that we have to be really concerned about when we have pets because it is the one that carries canine heartworm. So we definitely want to make sure that our pets are protected here. And this is the big one. This is the yellow fever mosquito or the Asian tiger mosquito. There's 2 species. Obviously, the Asian tiger mosquito is the one that was introduced. The yellow fever mosquito was already here. Along with yellow fever, we've got dengue, we've got Zika, we've got chikungunya. And these are the ones that are going to lay their eggs outside of the water. So they don't need any water source. Okay. Yellow fever mosquitoes lay eggs outside of the water. Hint, hint. These are also the ones that bite during the daytime. Most of our native mosquitoes are going to bite, in the dawn, in the dusk, in those kind of like odd hours. But the Asian tiger mosquito is the one that bites during the daytime, which can complicate things. And in fact, right now, what we're seeing is in Brazil, they've already had 1 million cases of dengue fever this year. It is beginning of March, and dengue fever is already 1 million cases this year in Brazil. So we know that these diseases are spreading. We know that mosquitoes are not great. And we know that mosquitoes are pretty much the deadliest animal that we have out there. These numbers fluctuate every year by a little bit, but you can see that just the diseases that mosquitoes carry and the death toll from that is pretty severe. And if we start seeing more and more of these diseases like malaria show up again in the United States, that is certainly going to complicate things. It's certainly going to have that death toll come up. I've seen death tolls for mosquitoes on a yearly basis, actually somewhere closer to 1 million. So take that as you will. For all those folks that are scared of snakes out there, nope, that nothing compared to snakes. And my favorite mammal is the hippopotamus, and those kill 500 people a year. So still not even close to what those mosquitoes are. So this is a big reason why we control mosquitoes. We are out there protecting public health. And our pets, again, canine heartworm is deadly in most cases. So protecting people, protecting the pets, and of course the annoyance factor. I mean, who wants to get bit by a mosquito? So we're all told, control mosquitoes. All you have to do is get rid of all the water sources, right? Just tip out those pot bottoms that have gotten all that extra moisture in there. Tip out those bird baths once a week. Tip out those old tires. Just get rid of all those standing water sources. Well, that's great. For the water sources we can see, and for the water sources we can do something about. And I know most of you are probably fairly busy as you're doing these treatments. So taking the time to dump out a whole bunch of these water sources may not be what you planned on doing that day. So we definitely need the customer's help in this. And again, eliminate all those water sources. Problem are gone, right? Perfect. The problem is, as most of you folks know, it's not that easy. Sure, we might see that pot that's filled up with water, or we may tip over that bird bath that's been sitting there for 2 weeks, but those are the obvious sources. Those are the ones that if the customer is partnering with us, they should be doing as well. The problem is the not so obvious sources. And this gets really fun for me because there's a lot more studies coming out on this of where we're seeing mosquitoes and why they're there. Karst, this is a word I had to look up a couple years ago when I heard it because I had no idea what it meant. Karst is basically an man-made cave. And so we see this in basements. We see this in parking garages. We see this in, you know, underground storage areas, anything like that. And what happens is that water starts to seep in, that water starts to fill up. And of course, we've got all that organic material that is getting flushed down with it that our mosquitoes are feeding on. So, storm drains. What are you going to do about storm drains when you're treating Mr. Smith's house? And that storm drain is, I don't know, a couple blocks away. We see these things and we know that the mosquitoes aren't respecting our fence lines. They're crossing those. They don't recognize that fence. So we're having mosquitoes come into the property, sometimes from other properties, sometimes from quite a distance away. Now, most mosquitoes will stick fairly close to their water source where they're going to be breeding, where those eggs are going to be laid. However, some of them do have a pretty good flight range. And when you look at a picture like this, we're looking at those yellow fever mosquitoes that lay their eggs outside of water. You could have a huge number of eggs being laid on those walls, and all it takes is that rainstorm to lift that water level up so those mosquito eggs hatch, and now you've got that infestation. And it takes about 7 to 14 days, depending on species, for that mosquito to go from that egg stage all the way to that adult where they're biting again. So you can imagine how often this happens, how frequently these systems that are now man-made caves, again, filling up with water, doing these things to promote mosquito growth, basically. A lot of this is obviously going to happen in cities, but I mean, storm drains are pretty much everywhere, right? We can see those in small towns. This is one of my favorite ones, and apologies for all the writing, but basically, there was this building in Washington, D.C., where the people in the basement of this building, over the winter, were getting bit by mosquitoes. And so you get this call that comes in, and honestly, come on, your first thought is, no, it's not mosquitoes. They're in the basement. It's winter. This is not happening. The customer is just insane. It's probably like bed bugs or something like that. But what they found is that this sump pit, which actually did have a fairly tight cover on it, I love their wording here, was seething with hundreds of mosquitoes. Seething. So these people in this basement were getting bit by mosquitoes in winter because this habitat was there. It was warm because it was protected by the building, so it didn't freeze over. So it had year round for those mosquitoes to keep developing and developing and developing. So when we have these issues where it seems a little crazy, think about this. We're also starting to see a lot of these mosquito species that were southern species are now moving further and further north because they're overwintering areas in these caves, in these man-made caverns, are now protected. They're not freezing over. They're not getting too cold. So we're seeing mosquito species move further and further north, which honestly is good money for the pest control industry, but not so great for our customers when they're calling about this. And when we have situations like this, we can't exactly deal with this, right? I mean, this is on somebody else's property. This is down the street. This is under a parking garage that we don't necessarily treat. It's probably not our customer. So finding some of these areas, if they are on property when we start to have problems, or recognizing where they're coming from, if it is off property, can be important just to let the customer know and to maybe put some additional control measures in place. But this was just a great example. Here's the actual picture of this. They're in the basement. That sump pit is where they're seething full of mosquitoes, and you can imagine the poor employees in the basement going, "It's winter. Why am I getting bit by damn mosquitoes out here?" I don't remember what they actually did with the situation, if they just sealed it up or if they managed to drain some of that or they treated the water. But again, really interesting case. And this is going to start happening more and more. All right. So we know it's not that easy. Okay. If it was, we wouldn't have problems with mosquitoes. Our homeowners can go to the nearest big box store and buy some mosquito spray and we're done with it, right? This is where you come in and where your knowledge and experience comes in because we cannot control the weather. Okay? It's going to rain, it's going to storm, there's going to be hurricanes, there's going to be floods. And when this happens, of course, again going back to that yellow fever mosquito that lays its eggs outside of water, all it needs to happen is a little bit of that water buildup and we've got mosquito issues. Now, when we do know that there's a flood coming in or there's super heavy rains coming in, before that happens, reminding the customer that as soon as this event is over to try and get rid of any of those standing water sources is going to help. And we'll go into, again, like I mentioned, we'll go into the treatment side of this just a little bit more as we continue here. So consider when these events are going to happen. It's not a good idea to go out and treat for adult mosquitoes right before a major rainstorm is going to come in because whatever product you're using, a lot of that is going to get washed away and we're not going to have the results. So consider that as you're out there doing your service for mosquitoes. The other thing I mentioned we cannot control is the neighbors. Yeah, gotta love the neighbors. So no matter what you do on the property that is your customers, when this is across the fence, we know that there's going to be mosquito larvae in there. We know there's going to be water buildup. So trying to mitigate some of those factors, we're not going to be able to eliminate it, right? It's impossible. That neighbor is not going to clean the stuff up. And unless a well-timed tornado or firestorm comes through, that is going to be there. So trying to put measures in place that at least minimize and recognize where that's coming from so we can focus more on those areas is important. So you have to know your surroundings. You know, you can come and treat my backyard for mosquitoes, but my neighbor right across the street who's got a situation like this, those mosquitoes aren't going to recognize that fence. They're just going to do their thing and fly around. As I mentioned, more and more, we're seeing mosquitoes show up in basements, especially in city areas where you have subways, you have these areas that are down below that are filling with water. And with that water, all that organic material, 7 to 14 days after that mosquito gets in, we've got a new round going. And so finding these is not easy. I was in New York City about a year ago, and we were actually looking for a situation like this. And half of these buildings are all connected to each other. So one, even getting down into the basement was about a 2-day process to find out who had keys and where they were and how to get down there. And then to actually get down there and inspect the space, it's insane. But you have to do it if there's these issues that are popping up. And again, think about these winter issues. Customers are crazy, we know that, but sometimes they're right when they're getting bit by mosquitoes in the middle of winter. So again, we have that space for them, that habitat. We have the perfect temperature. Well, maybe not perfect temperatures, but we've got good temperatures. It's not going to freeze down there. We've got the water, we've got the organic material. We are good to go in those situations. Okay. Then we have our customers. Love our customers because they normally pay us, but they don't always follow our instructions. So you're going to know that customer that goes ahead and says, oh yeah, you know, it's been about a week. I should tip out that bird bath, or I should clean up some of this mess, or we just had a massive rainstorm. I should go out and fix some of these water issues. And then we have those other customers who are just going to look at us and go, it's your job, fix my problem. Hopefully you're dealing with most of the former, But it happens that we have some of those later customers too. And think of this as well from your commercial standpoint. For those of you doing T&O or L&O, whatever you choose to call it, lawn or turf, you have large golf courses that are going to fill up with water that have water features. You may have parks. You may have commercial areas that you treat that will have these same issues, just on a bigger scale. Well, maybe a bigger scale. Hopefully not. But you understand what I'm getting at there is that this is not just a residential issue, it's a commercial issue wherever you are. If you have mosquitoes, which is pretty much the entire United States, you're going to have these issues. So trying to work with that customer and document. I cannot stress this enough that a lot of problems stem from the fact that issues were not documented. And if you don't document it, you have no proof that you told the customer about that. You had no proof that you noticed these issues. So it does fall back on you. Make sure that you document the issues that are there. I know it's a pain in the ass. We all don't like doing it, but it's there. Okay, now we get into the fun part. Okay. Again, identify your species. I know I went over that really quickly. There's great resources out there. If you don't know what's in your area or if you need some help with identification, that's okay. Great resources. It is important because do you have those daytime biters? Do you have those ones that are going to float their little eggs on the raft? It is going to help you treat. And of course, sanitation is super important. Getting rid of that water source isn't always possible. So let's talk about treatments. And I have a bunch of products up here. I am not necessarily advocating or recommending any of these specific products. They're just products in general, except for, of course, we've got FMC sponsoring this webinar. So shout out to them for putting this on, getting all those state credits for you folks. That is a huge job. So do want to mention Scion again, because that is one of their products for mosquitoes. But we have lots of great liquids. And I'll tell you with liquids, again, shout out to Scion. It's not always about the product, it's about how you use it. And yes, some products have a much longer residual. Some products, especially if you're using some of those all natural products as essential oil based products, are not going to last as long. If you have lots of rainfall, it's not going to last as long. Sometimes the extra sun is going to break it down faster. So it's not always the product necessarily, but it's going to be how you use it. So let's flow through a couple of these things. The first thing is when we're using that mist blower, and one, you should be using a mist blower. This is not work for a B&G. This is not work for, an aerosol. You're going to be treating a wide, theoretically, you're treating a fairly wide area in a customer's backyard or a golf course or a commercial site, whatever it is. So you do want to use that mist blower. You do want to calibrate it correctly. Make sure you're reading and following the label of the product that you are using, right? That's our gold standard. Read and follow the label. When you're using this, make sure you're kind of using that smooth up and down motion. You're not just spraying back and forth, but go up and down, because think of where those mosquitoes are. Think of where those adults are resting. In a lot of cases, they're looking for that cooler, shaded, little bit dry spot. And that's going to be underneath the vegetation in a lot of cases. They're not going to sit right on top of that leaf. They're going to sit underneath that leaf where the shade hits them and they're a little bit cooler in those areas. So think of all those mosquito resting spots that are out there. And of course, reading and following the label, get that nice smooth up and down motion of that mist blower. So you get some of those droplets, some of those particles sticking underneath where a lot of those mosquitoes are going to be resting. Now, we also want to target that kind of ecotone zone. And if you do tick works, you're probably, familiar with that phrase. It's that area that goes from that nice manicured lawn to that more wild, uncultured bits that are in the back towards the side. You can see from this picture here, there's not going to be mosquitoes just sitting there resting on the grass. They're going to like that darker shaded area where all that vegetation is, where they're a little bit more protected. So once again, as you're moving through and moving along, that up and down motion of that mist blower targeting that will get really good area. We also know that mosquitoes aren't going to be resting 10 feet up in the air. Okay, we're targeting that area pretty much, eye level, maybe a little bit higher down to the ground level. Okay, we don't need to try and treat 12 feet up. We don't need to get that tree that's all the way back there. Think of that. And of course, this has to be on the customer's property. You can't treat the customer next door or across the street, whatever, as much as unless you can get that customer. But this is going to be a fairly narrow treatment. So in this case, doing it pretty well. We're targeting that area. We're assuming that we've got that nice smooth up and down motion with that mist blower. So pretty good application here, though chances are he probably should have had long sleeves on, but we don't know what product he's using, so we'll let that one go. This is what not to do. Those mosquitoes are not going to be resting on tree trunks. That's out in the open, that's exposed. They're not going to be resting on those leaves that are way overhead. Okay, they're not going to be resting on that fence. So why are we treating in this area for mosquitoes and treating those tree trunks? Okay, even that grass below, okay, it's a little bit longer, but still, I kind of doubt that there's going to be much mosquitoes there. And we can also target near water sources. Again, we don't want to treat the water source with any of our liquid residuals, but we can treat where we know water is close by so that we're getting those closer to where their source is, closer to where they're going to start to emerge out of that water, getting that treatment just a little bit closer to them. So in this case, not a great application. We don't want to target solid stuff like that. We don't want to target those tree trunks. Now here's another one that's pretty good. Again, we see that ecotone zone, that nice manicured lawn up against the trees and bushes and shrubs that get a little bit more overgrown. It's that more natural area. So we're targeting there at about, body height from about eye level down. And that mist blower is gonna, create that mist. And so it is gonna flow in there a little bit better. That's why we want those really small droplets, is because we want it to kind of fog just a little bit. We want those particles to float. And that's why they get underneath and a little bit farther in where those mosquitoes are hiding and resting. So in this case, another good application. Again, probably long sleeves, but hey, we'll let them go on that. Okay, so targeting those trees, we've got those nice evergreens there, we've got leaves, all of that stuff is a good application, good place where those adult mosquitoes are going to be. Apologize for the words on this. I just took this off the internet, but of course we know that this is what customers sometimes think is okay. And again, this is where your knowledge, your experience, your licensing, everything goes to this. You know that looking at this is not a great application. Why are you treating the lawn? Okay. And this does actually specifically say for mosquitoes. So we know that this is supposed to be done, or they're advocating for this on mosquitoes. But why are we treating the lawn? And why are we treating those bare tree trunks back there? Not a great application. And again, we want that smooth up and down motion, but all those trees, all that vegetation in the back is where this can be targeted to. And from a standpoint of saving time as well, you could treat a whole acre of property, but you don't need to. If you just target those few areas where there's going to be resting spots, where there may be water, it saves you a lot of time from having to treat everything and have half of it be pretty much ineffective. So in this case, again, we don't want to treat that lawn. That's not where those mosquitoes are going to be. And yeah, don't let customers DIY it. Well, you can, and that's when they call you. Now, here's another one. Again, read and follow the label, but a lot of the labels allow you to treat close to structures. And when you look at this structure, you can kind of see that it's got that front porch there, that deck. Well, what's going on underneath there? It's shaded. It's probably a little bit cooler. There may be some water sources. We definitely have some plants around it that are good resting spots for mosquitoes. So look for these areas around the structure as well to make sure that we're targeting those for those mosquitoes that may be living closer to the house. Okay. We know carbon dioxide and heat is what's going to attract those females because they want that blood meal. And carbon dioxide heat says warm-blooded animals, so they're attracted to that. Houses are putting out a little bit more warmth sometimes. The sun's hitting that south side, so it's going to be a little bit warmer. They want the shade still, but they want to be close to their food source. So in this case, getting some of this product, even though it's kind of low, getting some of that product there is a great idea to target those areas. And of course, we're probably going to have people sitting on that porch trying to enjoy the nice evening without getting bit. So making sure product is there is going to help reduce those daytime and nighttime mosquitoes when they land. And that's a good point too. I'm sure most of you know, but I'm going to say it anyways. We can't promise that we're going to eliminate mosquitoes. We can't promise that somebody is never going to get dengue or Zika or Eastern equine encephalitis because we've treated their property. Okay. Mosquitoes don't recognize those fences. They're going to cross over. They don't recognize that no diseases are allowed here. They're going to do their thing. So be very careful when you're selling these services and when you're talking with the customers that we're not promising something that we can't give them. But again, around the house, great area to treat here, even though those bushes are a little bit low. Here we go with another do not. Why would you treat rocks? Um, just even assuming that maybe there's like a little pond or something on the other side of that, this is not a great area to treat. Anything solid like this, driveways, which I mean, you shouldn't be treating driveways anyways, but solid surfaces, rocks, rock walls, things like that. This is not a resting place for mosquitoes. So we don't want to be treating in these areas. And kind of when you think about it, if you kind of picture your typical, say your typical house on your typical property, you have a house in the middle, you have lawn all around it, and then you have that trees and stuff that are kind of like the border line, the property line. And so if you think that border, that property on the back and the house in the middle, you don't need to get most of what's on that lawn area, that zone in between the home and that untamed area. So think of those two areas to target for the most part. Again, you may have a big property, you may have a golf course, something like that, a park where you have wild areas in the middle of untamed areas and well manicured areas. So it's about knowing the property, it's about knowing where things are and where those likely resting places are. Again, we have some low plants here. We have some vegetation. It's not super heavy, but we're right up against this house again. And you can see the air conditioner on the adjacent property. We know that a lot of these HVAC units are constantly leaking out little bits of water. And if you're that mosquito that lays its eggs above the water line, like that yellow fever or that Asian tiger mosquito, you may have found that little pool of water. Everybody says, you know, these can develop in as little as a soda cap full of water. If you think of all the areas that could potentially be as small as a soda cap of water, that leaking air conditioner. I don't think we can see it in this picture, but you know, gutters. We have some gutters up on the top of that roof. I've definitely seen mosquitoes thriving in gutters. We have that hose there. Maybe we have some leftover water in there. Again, this is on the other property. Those garbage bins, I have seen mosquitoes in garbage bins. That is heaven for them. I mean, flies and mosquitoes in those garbage bins because you have all the stuff that leaked through the bag and nobody thinks to clean out their garbage bin. And now it's going to sit outside where it's nice and warm and those populations just go crazy. So again, in this case, even though that vegetation is a little bit lower, a little bit more sparse, I would say this is a good place to treat because of where it's located, because of the conducive conditions that are surrounding this. And that, again, is where your knowledge and experience comes in. That homeowner doesn't recognize that they've got a whole bunch of mosquitoes breeding up in that gutter or in their garbage bin, but you do. And you can look at this from your perspective, and this is where your value comes in so much. So, okay, here's another great one. Yes, I just said that mosquitoes are up in the gutters, but this is not a great place to treat. And plus, we don't really want to treat overhead too much, even with protection, even with your PPE on. Treating that high is just a risk, and mosquitoes aren't going to be resting on that roof. And I don't even see any gutters in that picture. So if we were down low on those bushes there, right in front of those windows, probably a halfway decent place. And you can see behind that truck, you can see all that vegetation back there. Great place to treat. However, up there, up front, not so great. Okay. So this all goes back to treating where they're going to be, where the mosquitoes are. So, you know, looking at this from that perspective, here's one that I've just told you don't treat over hard surfaces. But I also told you that below those decks sometimes is a great place to treat because shaded, darker, little bit cooler. So in this case, you may want to target some of that brick wall underneath there, definitely the plants around it, but there may be a leaking hose there. We can see the gutter that's right there up against the wall. We know that on the top of that patio there, on the top of that deck, they probably have plants. And what happens with the water? Well, it just kind of spills down underneath. So you may have pools of water. So in this case, under that deck, even though it's, stones and wall, not a bad place to treat because of what else is going on there, because of that shaded area and those plants around it, keeping it a little bit more cool as well. So again, knowledge and experience. This one, I apologize, it's not a great picture, but it popped up while I was looking for pictures. Why would you have a mosquito misting system on a fence that doesn't target anything that mosquitoes would be resting on? This is a great one for me. I don't know who installed this. I didn't even look into the picture, but I was just like, oh, I've got to use this picture. So, and I will say too, some of our customers do have those mosquito misting systems where they put in that the product and it just kind of mists out every, I don't know, hour or whatever. It treats every night. If they have one of those, just be aware of that. We don't want to over treat some of those areas. And if we can get them to not use it, it's great, but it's probably not harming anything. So once again, great products here. Let's talk a little bit about IGRs. I'm a fan of using IGRs for mosquito work. It may not have huge results, but to put in a little bit of IGR that's going to get to some of those standing water sources, that's going to transfer a little bit. We know that mosquitoes can actually pick up particles on their body, just like flies can. They can pick up small particles and then they can transfer them to where they're going. And so if they pick up that little particle of an IGR, transfer it to that little pot of water, now you've got a little bit of IGR in there that could affect those developing wrigglers and even the pupa that are in there. So I am a fan of IGRs for mosquito treatment. Take that as you will. I like it. We also have, oops, of course, let me go back to that. Sorry about that. I'm going to give people a little bit of vertigo. There's mosquito traps out there. If you choose to use those, make sure, again, they're placed properly. I've seen a lot of ovo traps, and I think this is the Inticare trap there. A lot of different mosquito traps that are intended to get to the larvae to attract those adults to get them to lay the eggs in that water and then destroy that. But they're put on the back of somebody's deck. Again, where's that mosquito going to be? Mosquito's not going to be on that deck. Mosquito's going to be back in those wooded areas, shaded. So putting one of these underneath the deck in that last picture we saw, putting one underneath that deck, maybe not a bad idea, but keep thinking back to where is that adult mosquito resting? And of course, we have some products for the water as well. If you are treating water sources, if that's something that you can do, I know different states have different licensing for some of this stuff, but there's BT products and other stuff. Again, I've got Alticid pictured here, other products as well that you can treat water sources. If you're doing that, make sure that you dose this correctly. It can be really difficult, especially with larger bodies of water, larger ponds, areas like that, to get that area and to make sure you're dosing it correctly. But again, perfectly good product if you have those standing water sources. Okay, once again, we got our IGR. All right, this is again the fun part for me. I am such a science geek, and this is where a lot of what I do come in, because I start looking at problems when they haven't been able to be solved by, your regular IPM methods. You've already done A, B, and C. Now we're at like L, M, and O. Okay, especially for you long guys, L and O. This was a cool study done about, I want to say about 4 years ago. Graduate students went out and sampled I was going to call it water, but the fluid that is in these gas station wash basins to wash your windshield. Some of these that the windshield comes out dirtier after you've supposedly cleaned it than before. They sampled this liquid and found mosquito larvae in here. Okay, who even knows what's in there, but supposedly some kind of window cleaning product. But there's also a whole bunch of gunk. And you can imagine these things never get cleaned out. The lowest paid employee gets told, go out and pour some more of this into that little bucket. So this never gets cleaned. It just keeps getting more and more buildup, more and more of that. So they saw mosquitoes actively breeding in here. So if you're that house or that building right next to this gas station, where are some of your mosquitoes coming from? Probably here. Now, we can't spray this, but if you look at that property next door, can we put maybe a couple traps back there? Or can we target some of our liquid treatments to this area so that we cover this area more versus maybe the other side of the house? We see a whole bunch of different types of standing water that sometimes you would look at and think there's no way anything could survive in that. Flies and mosquitoes can survive in that. So consider all of the standing water sources, not just the ones that are like clean water, but really interesting study there. I think they found it in like 90% of the basins that they sampled, and they sampled a lot. I think they sampled from over 100 different gas stations. So it's not a one-off. This is one of my favorites too, cemeteries. You can also apply this to parks, golf courses, anything like that. Cemeteries, especially though, you have these areas where there's going to be water pooling. And sometimes you don't see that water pooling because it's pooling underneath stones, underneath caps. Sometimes when they break like this, you can obviously see this. The other thing about cemeteries is people bring flowers and they bring flower pots and they bring vases and they leave it there. They don't come back to get it. They don't come back to tip it out in 7 days. So now you have those beautiful cut flowers in that vase with water, and those cut flowers start to decay. You now have all of that organic material in that water in that vase. And here we go again. We've got more mosquitoes. So consider your neighboring properties, or again, if you are one of those TNO or LNO folks that are treating some of these larger properties, look for some of these weird things that could be holding water. And it sounds really weird to be like, oh, where's your nearest cemetery? But this happens. And we have some areas, I mean, I'm thinking like New Orleans and Louisiana, some areas where those cemeteries are right up against residential properties. So in this case, could we treat this? Maybe. I mean, we've got some bigger vegetation. We could certainly try and get something into that water to treat with a larvicide. But for those homes that are around this, that's going to be a little tough. And finding the right areas to target the treatment to could be a little challenging. But again, knowing where it is, just knowing that we have that problem close by, we can target a little bit better and keep an eye on it and make the customers aware of it. Again, this is never going to eliminate all the mosquitoes that you have out there. Even for a day, there's still going to be mosquitoes that fly in. So consider where some of these other weird sources. We talked about those karst at the beginning, but this is a perfect example when we have tombs or we have old graveyards that stones are starting to break down, water is pooling up, we have all of those flowers, all of those vases. And if you work with one of these properties, that's a great way to tell the property management to, hey, dispose of this stuff maybe a little bit more often than you are, because 7 to 14 days is the life cycle of these things. And of course, we have areas like this, and this may not look like a big mosquito area, but it is. Obviously, we'd think flies, we'd think cockroaches, rodents before we would think mosquitoes. But when this is right next to one of those restaurants that has all that open air seating on a patio that people like to enjoy when it's a beautiful night out, now we've got all of this. You can see the trees that are right behind it. Where do you think those mosquitoes are starting to rest? So, and of course, all the stuff that leaks down into that dumpster, and we know dumpsters don't get cleaned ever. I'd like to say very often, but you know that dumpster's never going to get actually cleaned out. So in cases like this, if we can get them to clean those dumpster pads sometimes, or if that's a service that you offer, that's an amazing add-on service to clean dumpster pads every so often. If they can get the trash picked up a little bit more often, because obviously this is overflowing, and you know the guys driving the trash trucks aren't going to get out and get all those extra bags of trash that are laying on the floor. No, they're going to empty that dumpster. They're moving on. So all of this is going to sit there for longer and longer. So if you're in an area that has mosquito problems, and again, most of the summer in most of the areas, we can start targeting some of these areas, especially when it comes to restaurants, anything with outdoor seating, patios, things like that. Look for the nearby dumpsters. And this is a great one too. There was a study done on, believe it or not, grad students have the worst jobs sometimes. There was a study done on areas that had animal feces versus areas that didn't. And who do you think had more mosquitoes? Um, Areas that had animals that were not cleaned up after definitely had this. So think of dog parks, and a lot of dog parks are right next to regular parks. That now this is extra material that flows into that water. Again, organic material that those mosquitoes are going to feed on. And we know that the adults, both males and females, they like to drink nectar, which again, we think, okay, poop, come on, poop, nectar, not the same thing, but they get nutrients out of this that help them live longer. So they have shown that if you've ever seen those cool pictures of butterflies like landing on a big pile of elephant poop or something like that, they're getting nutrients out of there that helps them live longer and actually have more support for the offspring that they're producing. So not just the solid waste, but the runoff of that waste. If you've got that customer that lets their dog run in the backyard and never cleans up after it, guess what's going to happen here? So alerting them to that, because they just think, the dog pooped in the backyard. But now you're telling them the dog pooped in the backyard, and that's attracting mosquitoes. So sometimes just refraining how that looks in their head can be pretty important that way. So yeah, clean up after your animals. Of course, we can't do anything about the wild animals that are out there, but it is what it is. This is why our job is not easy. This is why we still have mosquitoes. This is why we will always have mosquitoes. We're never going to eliminate them. It's always going to be part of what's out there, which, I mean, in a way is job security for us. But at the same time, it does make things challenging. But remembering why we do this. Again, diseases. We don't see too much disease in the US compared to other areas, but it's coming. There was just a case of the plague in, I believe it was Washington or Oregon this year. We still have the plague. There's an average of 9 cases of plague every year. Yes, I know that's carried by fleas and not mosquitoes, but we have outbreaks of West Nile. We're probably going to see more outbreaks. Zika came up a couple years ago, and we saw cases of Zika. We may see new diseases transmitted by mosquitoes. So we really are out there protecting people and their pets, again, heartworm, from these diseases. And nobody likes to get bit by mosquitoes. They're annoying, so they don't want them there. So we want those happy customers when it comes to that. And as you're thinking about this as well, and thinking about where those mosquitoes rest, how they're resting, those areas that are attracting them, don't forget some of those weird ones. Again, that's probably not going to be your first thought, and that's okay. But when you get that call back, when stuff happens, when you've got to go out and treat a couple times, start thinking outside the bird bath. Start thinking of where some of those other water sources are. Start thinking about neighboring properties and even flowers. I told you that they're going to feed on dung. They're going to feed on animal feces, but nectar is a big source, especially for the males. We know females feed on nectar as well, but the males, especially some of the females, they go after those nectar sources. So if you have that customer, I'm going to play that again because it's just so cool to watch that little mosquito come out of the pupal stage. If you have that customer that loves all the beautiful flowers around their house, that's great. But can we move those flowers maybe a little farther out from the house so that as they're sitting on the deck, as they're sitting on the patio, as they're sitting on the front porch, there's a little bit less attractiveness to that specific area, and maybe move it out just a little bit. It's not easy. Again, we know that customer with tons of flowers loves their flowers and doesn't want to move their flowers. So making them aware that that is a source is a really good idea. So again, for the person that asked about climate change, absolutely, we are going to see that. We are going to see that more. It's going to continue. This is me. If you want my information, if you scan that code, you have everything. You have my email, my LinkedIn, my phone number, everything like that. If you sign up on my website or you email me, you will get a free download of this presentation and 5 tips for better monitoring. So feel free to do that and contact me with any of your questions. If we don't get to anything today, I'd be happy to talk to you more and answer specific questions about your region and things like that. So feel free to take a quick screenshot of that.
All right, great. Well, want to thank Chelle for doing a great job and presenting our March 1st Friday on mosquitoes.
Thank you, folks.
Thanks all. Have a great weekend. Thanks.
Take care.